Hello and welcome to Friday's Goldster Inside Story, wherever you are and whatever mood you're in. I am Humphrey Hawksley, your host for the next hour as we go on an intricate tour of the human brain, that part of our body that tells us how we feel, how to react, how to love, how to find pleasure, how to feel pain. My guest is a neuroscientist, and coincidentally, a Goldster Inside Story is meshing with Goldster's Healthy Brain Week. And we're simultaneously streaming on Facebook and YouTube. What are our brains telling us how to feel about that? She is waiting comfortably on her sofa and has a rare and much acclaimed talent for turning complex things into something we all understand. And she is passionate about explaining how our brains affect our behavior. So ask her, don't hold back. Comments, chat, send us your thoughts. Ask her now, even while I'm in the introduction, to kick off our conversation. Her book is, and I've got it here, Your Brain is Boss. How do we banish those negative things and create empathy, motivate those around us, come up with new ideas and ways of making a better world by thinking and working together? Can we change the way we think, who we are, our characters, or should we? And what is the pleasure umbrella? Yes, we'll find out more about that too. So many questions about our grey matter, and to answer them all, welcome Dr. Lynda Shaw to Goldster Inside Story.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. How are you doing?
I'm good. Well, now, what do I call you? Lynda, Dr. Shaw? What I mean?
Has to be Lynda.
Lynda's fine. Okay, we can all call you Lynda. Now, Lynda, before we start, I want to sort of anchor my conversation so I don't go way off piste. What exactly is a neuroscientist?
I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and we study basically the nervous system, which of course includes the brain. We study its structure and we study its function. But I also dovetail that very much with behavior, because our brain changes our behavior and our behavior changes our brain. And that to me is really a delicious concept to get our heads around, metaphorically, of course, so that we actually make the topic of neuroscience extremely practical and applicable on a day-to-day basis.
So you study the brain like, say, an orthopedic surgeon would study a hip or something like that?
Yeah, I have handled a real brain and dissected it, but I don't do that normally, as you can imagine. But I do use fMRI scanning equipment for my research. But in the commercial world, I don't study brains like that at all. I talk about the theories and make sure that they are applicable, and people can use the information 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's what's important to me.
Right. Okay. And just to sort of drill down on that a little bit more, how is the brain different from the mind?
Really good question. The mind is what the brain does. So the brain is this tangible physical thing in the head. It's got a shape. You can touch it if you did dissection or whatever. But the mind, you can't. It's this nebulous idea that we don't even know where it is. We're not sure. It's supposed to be in the brain, but we're not absolutely 100% sure. So the mind is what the brain does. That's the best.
The mind is what the brain is. So the mind is a sort of coagulation of what our thoughts and emotions are somewhere.
Yeah.
Around some, but the brain is a sort of physical thing, isn't it? Is it a muscle, or is it?
No. It's an organ.
It's an organ.
That's one of the neuroscience is littered with misinformation. I call it neuro nonsense when I'm being polite. And so no. And one of them is the brain is a muscle, and we can work it, we can expand it, we can change it. We certainly can, and we do that on a daily basis with neuroplasticity, as we're all aware. But we can say it is like a muscle in that we can change it depending on what we're doing. But it's not a muscle; it's an organ.
It's an organ, right? So I'm glad I wasn't talking neuro nonsense, or at least I was asking to be corrected on my neuro nonsense. I just want to give a little bit more before we get to the points that you raised in you. And I have to say, everybody, this is a great read. Listen to this conversation, buy this book, because then you will really understand how we all think. But is there a particular part of my brain inside my skull here that is operating, say, for this conversation? Is it the cerebellum, the hindbrain, the midbrain? I mean, does it have a name?
There is a lot of brain going on as you're talking to me. You've got your visual cortex happening because you're looking at me on a camera. You've got the auditory processing because you're hearing me. You've got the motor cortex working because you are moving your hands, you're gesticulating. There is an awful lot going on, and you've got the frontal cortex working because you're thinking. So you're thinking all of the time, and perhaps we might even stimulate the emotion center in the brain, the limbic system, which because we might touch upon things that are funny, hopefully amusing or thoughtful. So we might tap into some emotion as well. So there's a lot of brain going on in our conversation.
So the limbic system is what might have been triggered when we were talking about my talking neuro nonsense, for example. I would either laugh or get insulted at that sort of thing. And the front bit here is me wondering what to ask you next.
That's it. You've got the idea.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions, thoughts on this? And don't be afraid to put any neuro nonsense in there, because Lynda all said it right, that one of the golden rules we have in Goldster is the only stupid question is the one that you never ask. And before you come down to some great bullet points in the book, which I'm going to get to now, but before that, we are going to talk about the pleasure umbrella, and that sounds so enticing. Tell us what that's about.
Well, the pleasure umbrella is a concept I came up with about, 12, maybe 14 years ago now. And basically, when we put the brain in a pleasurable state, we're the most effective and efficient we can be. And the best way of doing that is through kindness, generosity, and altruism. So when we're decent human beings. So I thought this was an excellent concept, the pleasure umbrella, because it involves a lot of ideas underneath that umbrella. And I started talking about it. I'm a professional speaker, so I was on stage talking about the pleasure umbrella until a member of the audience says, "You shouldn't talk about the pleasure umbrella." And I said, "Why not?" They said, "Because it sounds like a sex toy." I was...
Oh, yes.
I was almost speechless. I went crimson red, and I stopped talking about the pleasure umbrella for a very long time. But I do talk about it now because I think we might have grown up a little bit. I hope so.
I hope so. Well, this is Goldster, so we are going to talk later on about the pleasure umbrella. And if anybody's got any questions, what you think it might be, any ideas for it, because we're in a bit of an abstract at the moment, apart from the teaser that Dr. Lynda gave us, put it in the chat. Let us know what you think a pleasure umbrella should be. We have in fact, it's a good question. So I'm going to put this now from Patrick. How did you arrive at the title for your book? And were there other options?
I agonized over the title of the book. I absolutely agonized it. It's like an abstract when you write an academic paper. Writing something short is really difficult to writing something long. So writing a title is a nightmare for me because I want to talk about lots of different things. So Your Brain is Boss, basically, I quite liked it because it says lots of things. It says, yes, your brain is boss, but the brain is yours. So that makes you your boss. And yes, in actual fact, that very much marries into the brain changes behavior, behavior changes the brain, which actually, once we understand that, gives us a little bit of an idea that we have more control over our destiny than we realize. And I use the word control very delicately, because we can't control the brain all of the time. Of course we can't, because that would be silly, what the flight or flight response, etc., and that would be dangerous. But we can decide how to behave, and in so doing, we wire our brain accordingly. And how brain is wired, then we are actually changing our behavior. So it's this lovely feedback loop of which the brain is full of, and which enables us to feel in more control of our destiny. And I like that idea very much.
And does our brain continue to rewire itself? Because we know with children and teenagers even, it's constantly evolving, but like the muscles of the body, whatever, does that stop at a certain age?
No, we used to think it did.
Mm.
We used to think by the early 20s, well, the brain you had by then was the brain you kept until the day you leave this planet. But no, we now know that we can change the wiring of our brain by keeping ourselves curious, keeping ourselves by learning things all of the time. And we can learn things until we're 100, even beyond. We might be slower at learning, but we can learn and therefore lay down new neural pathways. So that is what is wonderful. And that is what actually keeps us young. That is what keeps, if we keep that curiosity going and keep being hungry to learn something new and to be interested in people, that is one of the keys to for a healthy old age.
Oh, so the curiosity, the learning, and the social interaction, and the sort of, well, I'm learning a lot at the moment, and we're only 10 minutes into our conversation. Pauline says, this is about the pleasure umbrella. We want to hear more about that before we get to it. That's priceless. This is the sex toy pleasure umbrella. Says more about them than you, Lynda. What does it say about them, Pauline? Let us know what you think. Now, you put in here, I better read the subtitle, using mind power to develop influence, creativity, and work satisfaction. So that is the subtitle to Your Brain is Boss, and how you can boss your brain, I guess. But that you put in some things that sort of impact all our lives now, and I just want to touch on them as they go on. Empathy. What is empathy, and is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Empathy is wonderful. It is wonderful. There can be a dark side to empathy. So basically, empathy is when we feel what somebody else is feeling. It helps us understand what somebody else is feeling. And there are three ways of looking at empathy. You have the emotional empathy, which is actually feeling what somebody is feeling by trying to understand them, by observation, by putting yourself in their shoes. Then you have got the cognitive empathy, which is engaging the frontal lobe. So you're actually using your imagination. You're imagining what it's like to be them, imagining that feeling. And then you have compassionate empathy, and compassionate empathy is something that we can we use when we're in the caring professions, nurses, doctors. That's compassionate empathy, where we want to help somebody because we are caring about that person and their situation. The thing is with empathy, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, I actually found it very difficult to handle for a couple of weeks. I've had so much empathy for the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia that I found it very difficult to focus. I found it very difficult to function properly in my work. Everything, it was hard. And I realized after a couple of weeks, I thought, crumbs, Lynda, you're falling into a trap here. You've turned your empathy about you. I turned the empathy I was feeling about me and how I was feeling about them. And that is an issue with empathy. So what I did was I switched it. First of all, I became very practical. So I donated money to various charities. And then so that helped me get out of this loop. And then what I did was I turned my empathy into compassion. So I was feeling compassion for the people who were suffering, which enabled me to think of them and not think of me. So it's quite empathy is wonderful, absolutely wonderful, because it enables us to understand how people are feeling. But we do have to be careful we don't get drawn into too much and that it starts working against us.
So that is fascinating. So your initial empathy for the Ukrainians and that whole situation there, you were actually thinking, how does it impact on me? How should I react to it? And in that way, you were going around in your circles. Yeah. And then you gave the money and set to work and changed empathy into compassion.
Yeah. So I was just I was focusing on them and not about how I was feeling because of their plight. So it was again working with the feelings, but I was very aware that it wasn't about me. So get out of my own way, Lynda. Get out of your own way and concentrate on outside of yourself.
And that's how you make your brain the boss, is it? That's one example of saying this shouldn't happen. Get my brain to fix this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise you get drawn into some kind of negative pattern and a negative way of thinking, and that can draw us down into a very dark place. And we don't want that, because then we're not useful. And I like to be useful very much. I like to be useful. So
Yes.
I don't want to focus on myself in that context.
That is absolutely fascinating. Can I just ask you one other word? So we had empathy. You talked about compassion. What is sympathy?
Sympathy, I sympathy to me is a word like tolerate. It seems there's
Oh,
an element of arrogance to sympathy. It's like when we tolerate someone, I think that is really rude. And we
yeah.
shouldn't tolerate people. We should feel compassion for people. And it's the same with sympathy. Sympathy sort of denotes pity. And to pity somebody is not
Yeah.
helpful either, I think. I mean, sympathy helps us understand people's suffering. But then again, I think empathy is one step better than sympathy.
Yes. So we should teach our brains to be empathetic as opposed to sympathetic, or we should
Yeah.
ourselves to think in that way. Pauline says that explains a lot about reactions to things. Thank you, Pauline. It does to me too. Patricia, we might be going a bit off piste here, but I love the question. I read that babies' brains practice activities they observe, even though they physically aren't able to yet. If correct, does that mean a baby observing criminal behavior can be conditioned so early intervention in criminal families is a crucial cycle to break? So if
That's a strange thing to ask. Somebody asked me a very similar question yesterday.
oh
Clearly, I've got to do some research on criminology. Thank you. I mean, yes, the best lessons are taught, not caught. So
yes.
we learn by observation. That's absolutely true. But whether or not that baby, depending on the age of the infant, whether that baby is processing, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, or whether it's criminal or not, I would doubt at the young. But they might copy something, like if somebody is taking things that don't belong to them, then they might take things that don't belong to them more. Although a small child, of course, will take things they don't that are not theirs, because they haven't yet learned social skills. So it depends on the age of the infant. But I do recognise that the best lessons are taught, not caught. So what is it?
But of course, there is violence. Of course, if you're brought up in a broken, violent home, and see that around you all the time, you are likely to grow up as a violent person.
That is debatable. Clearly, that happens a lot. But what is very clear is that child will grow up in high levels of stress. Because that is a very stressful situation to be in. And there is a lot of research that suggests that a child that is brought up in a very stressful situation, their brain development is impaired. So there might be impairment with the hippocampus, which is about memory, which will affect how they learn and how much information they retain. The amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, which is part of the emotion system, that is impaired as well in development, and even the frontal lobe, the thinking part of the brain, and the higher executive functions. So there is evidence to suggest that the child is being brought up in a very stressful situation that is from abuse or whatever, will have maybe be impaired with learning difficulties. Yeah.
Oh, that is very interesting. Also brings me on to the next point that I had, is that you have, I'll show them up here if they can. You have a section on stress where you have 10 pointers towards stress, and we don't want to go through them all, but you have to ask yourself the questions about is: do you find difficulty in communicating with colleagues and family? Are there misunderstandings? Do you explode or fester at something someone says? Do you frequently get frustrated and angry? These are all, and there are more, these are all symptoms of stress, are they?
Yes. Yeah, they're the flags that you can recognize as being warning signs that actually you are feeling stress. Cortisol, the stress hormone, when it is secreted in abundance in a chronic situation, it can create all sorts of things, and other things are going on in the system as well. But the thing is, with cortisol in chronic high levels, it can cause many physical illnesses as well, like heart disease, high blood pressure, even some cancers. So if you have any of those flags that you have just talked about, Humphrey, if you have any of that, then it's a very, very, very good idea to step back and breathe and just take some time out if possible, or at least go for a walk or have a bath or something so you get some respite.
Just let's row back a bit. Define stress for us? Because it's talked about all the time now. We hear it on the media, but do we actually, what is it?
Stress is a response. It is a response that the nervous systems will hold on to. So, for instance, the sympathetic nervous system will be stimulated, and when that's stimulated in an excitable, stressful situation, in a worrying situation, in a fearful situation, all of those things that can raise stress levels, what that will do, it will shut down the gut so we don't digest food properly. We might get an upset tummy, our heart will race, we will sweat. So what you want to do is engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which is much calmer. And so that therefore we are shutting up the sympathetic nervous system, which is highly important if something is a threat, because it will make us move and get out of the way or indeed fight. But what we want to do on a day-to-day basis is to be calmly alert. And calmly alert is when we are working with the parasympathetic nervous system, which is when we are, we might meditate, or we might just go for a walk or do something where we are calming ourselves down and getting out of this loop. So we want to get out of that loop and not make ourselves poorly, because stress in chronic situations can make us very poorly.
Again, this would be, the brain taking control, or you allowing the brain to take control to solve that. But I mean, when I was growing up, when I was much younger, stress was, if you were in a car accident, or if you'd been in a war, or if your life had been actually threatened. But in today's world, it's talked about in a much wider area, as if just because the call center isn't fixing your problem, you become stressed.
I think these days, everything moves so fast, which is quite stressful for our bodies, because evolutionary wise, we haven't quite caught up, but not by any means. So therefore, biologically, we are not meant to be working at breakneck speed all the time and making fast decisions and fast constantly. In fact, you know what? My great grandmother used to say, hard work never killed anyone, but worry does. And even in those days, this little tiny old lady, she recognized that worry, which we would now call stress, actually was a killer, and it is a killer. So don't get me wrong. If you have secretions of cortisol in small amounts of secretions, that's good, because it keeps us sharp, keeps us on our toes.
Cortisol, that's the chemical that the brain
one of the
secretes,
stress hormones. Yeah, it's one of the most famous stress hormones that people recognize, which is why I mention it. So cortisol is great in small amounts. It does help us learn. It keeps us sharp. It helps us with deadlines at work and things like that. But it's when we become overwhelmed and for a long time, that's when it becomes dangerous, and it is dangerous. So we do need to find ways that we like to suit us individually, and that allows us to get off the world, and just stop for a few minutes and take that breath.
And just I mean, there are many types of stress, obviously, but if you are in a car accident, or you have someone yelling at you or something, that's one level of stress, and the adrenaline and cortisol and that comes out. But if, say, you're in a bad marriage, or you've got an adolescent child that's a drug addict or something like that, you've got a constant stress, haven't you? Are they different things, or am I talking about the same thing?
No, they're different levels of stresses. They're stresses. We respond to stresses in different ways individually. None of us are all the same. We're individuals. So therefore, we will respond to stress in different ways. And if you are in a situation where your home life is extremely stressful, then that's a tough call. That's a really tough call, because you feel that you can't escape it. But to be honest with you, if you've got to go to the toilet, so I would lock the bathroom door for 5 minutes and do some breathing exercises. Breathe in for the count of 5, out to the count of 5, whatever you wish, just so that you know that you are calming down your nervous system so that you can handle things better and you don't become ill. And I think, and everybody can disappear to the loo for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think that is, we need to do that. We need
and if you have a friend or relative that comes to you, and all the time they're talking about their problems and their stress and their worries, is there anything you can say to them?
Yeah. You could tip into the world of toxic positivity here. Toxic positivity is when we're in, at the moment, our society is convinced or being taught that we have to be positive all the time. Well, I'm sorry, that's nonsense. It's not healthy. It is not healthy, because rubbish happens and we've got to respond to it in a proper way that actually we can handle it. So you can't be bouncing around like Tigger all of the time. But with toxic positivity, you hear people, you even hear professionals in my field saying it like, oh, you're lucky. Think of people, there are some people worse off than you, or that's toxic positivity. So if somebody's coming to you with a problem and they try to avoid
on your blanket
their problem,
on your blanket,
try to avoid that you are that you're dismissing what they are saying by making them feel small because they're feeling that way, because how they're feeling is really important to them, extremely important. So don't diminish that, don't belittle it with toxic positivity. The best thing you can do is listen properly. Just listen properly and say, how can I help you? Sometimes there's no way you can help them, but they're just pleased that you listened. However, in answer to your question, if people keep coming back to you with the same old, you actually got to say, I'm sorry, I really want to help you. Tell me how I can help you, I'm listening, but we need to stop playing the record for a little bit. Because you've got to protect yourself and protect them, but keep on saying the same stuff.
That's okay. That's that's really good. Toxic positivity. I'm going to go away with that. No bounce in my step. I'll say I don't have to be positive anymore. Thank you, Lynda, for giving me a break from that. Pauline says, can the gut/brain link be broken? I'm not sure what that means. Is that the brain creates a stomachache or something? Pauline, do you know what that means, Lynda? Can the
there is, it's enteric nervous system. The brain, the link between the brain and the gut is via the vagus nerve, which is it's the longest nerve in the body, and it's like this motorway going up from the gut. The information going from the gut to the brain is a lot. The information from the brain to the gut is less. The brain will be saying to the gut, have butterflies feeling now because you're nervous. That's the sort of information that will be coming from the brain. The gut information is a lot more. So there is a huge amount of studies going on in this area. There are some exaggerations out there, which isn't helpful. But in terms of breaking the link between the gut and the brain, no, we can't break the link, because that means the vagus nerve would be no longer working. So we need that information. And the gut, of course, is an organism that we've had before we even had a brain, according to some research. It was sort of stuck on a rock somewhere. And that was our original brain. So there depends on the research you read. So it's an extremely important topic to study, the gut brain.
So just to clarify my own mind, is that so when I was growing up, people had stomach ulcers that were caused from worry. Is that the gut brain link?
That is the chemicals in the brain responding to the chemicals in around the body. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter and a hormone that is, I call it the happy chappy. It's all about mood, sleep, appetite, and emotion. But the majority of serotonin is in the gut, not the brain. So you see that there is an awful lot to investigate when we're talking about the two. But you're right, certainly stomach ulcers are an indication of long worrying for a long time.
Yes, Pauline, thank you for that question, because that question itself enlightened me. I wasn't quite sure what it meant, but we now know what it does mean. And getting onto these serotonins, cortisol, and everything, physical exercise produces chemicals. Explain what exercises produce what chemicals and what they do to our body and brain.
Well, we touched upon earlier about the aging brain, or the brain is that term is actually irritates a lot of people because the brain ages all of the time from birth.
Right.
It is aging, right? So as we get older, there's a huge amount of research. I don't know if you investigated the blue zones. You can Google the blue zones. There's a lot of research going on there at the moment. There are 5 areas in the world that are blue zones. And it's where people are living to 110, 115 without
Oh, right.
disease, without heart disease, without all of the age-related problems that we have become accustomed to reading about here in the West. So these areas are very different. There's one in California, there's one in Costa Rica, there's one in Japan. They're very different. So the scientists are trying to work out common themes between them. And they one of the themes is that 5 generations will sit around the table together. Another one is that they actually have a purpose. They contribute to their community on a daily basis. So they've got a reason to get up in the morning. But one of the ones that is very key on us aging well is actually exercise, physical exercise. And we now know, or at the moment we know until the next tranche of research happens, which we always have to get used to, the things change in our learnings, is that if we are exercising physically and cognitively at the same time, for instance, if we are learning a new dance routine or we're learning a kata in karate, if we are doing those 2 things where we're thinking and moving at the same time, it is now thought that we are doing the best we can for our brain and its development. Even more so than anything else that comes out of the blue zones, like the social interaction, very important, nutrition, very important, all of those things. And of course, we then tip into the world of epigenetics, whereby, and I'm not an expert in this area whatsoever, I'm not a geneticist, but when we are exercising, we could be changing the way we are reading our DNA. So so we're not changing the structure of the DNA, we're changing the DNA expression. So all of a sudden we have got something we can do to help ourselves in a positive way. And that is wonderful, don't you think? So
I think so. If I'm jogging on a treadmill at the gym, it is not as good for me as playing tennis, where I'm actually exercising and thinking at the same time.
One could argue that. One could argue that. There is weightlifting, is using weights is actually very good for the brain as well, which one is surprising, because we would think it's a cardiovascular work where we're getting our heart pumping and the blood pumping around our organs would be the best thing, but actually weights is good as well. So there are a lot of ways. The message is move. We are not meant to sit on our backside, you know. We are not meant to be sitting at a screen all day and going home and watch TV, or if we're already at home working from home, to watch TV. We really do need to move. And I think if we get that message out of today, that will be a good message.
Yeah. And when people talk of endorphins, is that one thing, or is that a cluster of chemicals that the brain releases? That these are good, happy chemicals, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of happy chemicals, endorphins being one, serotonin being another. Dopamine is a happy chemical if we are using it in terms of a reward and motivation. And yeah, there are if we get the feel-good neurotransmitters up at a nice level of secretions, then we will be better off on a daily basis.
Feel good neurotransmitters. I like that. I'm picking up some classic phrases here in this recording. We'll have to go through it. Gillian says, in the blue zones, yes, that you were talking, they live a more relaxing lifestyle, so less stress. And these are these places in Japan and California. And I think there was one up in northern Pakistan called Hunza that I remember when I was a sort of cut off.
Hello,
are you having a party there, Lynda? In the background. I have a note here after physical exercise about perfectionism, because this is a part of your, and I think we all know people who don't do anything because it's not perfect. So is perfectionism a good thing or a bad thing?
Perfectionism, if we have high standards, that's a good thing. If those high standards high standards stop us meeting a deadline because we're holding on to that piece of work because it's not quite perfect yet, that's not a good thing. That's not going to be helpful in our work. And if we're holding on to things because they're not as wonderful as they are, then that's going to worry us. That's going to be a highly stressful situation. Interestingly enough, there is a manual called the DSM. We're on version 5 at the moment, and it's a diagnostic and a statistical manual that psychologists and psychiatrists throughout the world use. And every edition, we add more things. And in the DSM version 5, perfectionism is a mental health disorder. But because it's under the umbrella of obsessive compulsive personality. Now, we can't beat ourselves up about this because that would be nonsense. That would not be helpful at all. So, but if you think to yourself, I am one of those people that's got really high standards, but I can let that piece of work go, that's okay. If we are not, we're holding on to it and it is causing difficulties, then that's not okay.
So that's where you have to tell your brain to be the boss and tell you, look, it's okay. It's not going to be 100%, but we have to get it through at 90%. And you mentioned that it's been it's been diagnosed, it's been categorized as a mental health disorder. I mean, in today's world, we have a raft of mental health disorders, don't we? And there are celebrities and a lot of people talking about mental health a lot. Is that too much? Are we all wondering whether we're normal or not normal? I mean, how does that work?
I don't know if this word normal exists. I really don't. I actually think that each one of us will have issues of some description or other and take as normal, and normal, I've used the word normal, and not be a mental health issue. But we are individuals. We are our perception is our own personal reality. Okay, so that is really important. It's our own personal reality. So anybody else's reality is not ours, because that's our perception is, and our past and our experiences of what makes us who we are and how we see things. So yeah, I think mental health issues, it is good to discuss them, extremely good, because we need to be more aware and not and still there is still so much stigma around mental health challenges, and we need to stop that. But I'm hoping that in the not too distant future, the pendulum will not swing so far, and that we actually take it as, yes, that person's got, whatever, some kind of challenge going on, and that's cool because they're still functioning extremely well. So neurodiversity is very a big topic at the moment, and especially in the workplace, and it is great because everybody has a contribution that they can make that is good for the community that they're belonging to. So that is what we need to embrace. And if somebody has got a mental health challenge, we compassion and help them through it in the best way we can, but equally help them feel that they are useful to society as well.
But as you say, we all have our own individual brains, characters that develop over time. So we're all unique. So we all have challenges, and we all have, what we call normalcy or whatever. And as these diagnoses become more sophisticated, everybody's going to be something, aren't they?
There is an element of that. I think the key is this word that we have got, and we've been told we have, is it interfering with our daily lives? Is it interfering with our functioning in an efficient way, in a happy way, and all of those things? And if it is interfering, then we need help. If it's not, then fine.
Then carry on. Emma's taking us off a little off piste, Emma, but I love the question. Considering what goes on in politics, can we say successful politicians are masters at playing mind games with the public? Or could it be that they use their brain power to propel themselves to positions of authority? We've all seen the shenanigans of the past few years. Any thoughts, Lynda?
Well, if our politicians are playing mind games, they're not very good at it, are they? I mean, they're really not. If they are playing mind games, I think it's backfiring somewhat, because there's an awful lot of a lot of us who are thinking that they're not
They're
such
great.
human
Yeah.
beings.
So, but they, in fact, we had this on yesterday. Actually, we had James Hanning on, who's written a book about David Cameron. And I asked him a question. I'll ask you the same question. Are there, particular mental situations or characters that politicians have that propel them or want them to be propelled into these positions of authority?
The politicians that I've met, I think they went into politics originally because they really thought they could do some good. The ones that I've met, clearly that might not be everyone, but I think they get drawn in and sucked into the machine.
Yeah.
And therefore their original reasons are overshadowed somewhat, and they lose that identity. That's just an observation. That's got nothing to do with neuroscience.
It's a personal observation, not a neuroscientific legend. But the next one I have down, which sort of touches on this, but touches on us all, emotional intelligence. We did talk about empathy, but expand on that a bit.
Emotional intelligence is, when you've got all these qualifications and you are experienced and you're still not able to command a very good salary. And then you've got somebody who's not very intelligent, who is not very experienced, but they're earning more than you. Not necessarily at the same job, of course, but they're still earning more than you. You can probably bet your bottom dollar that they're high in emotional intelligence. An example of emotional intelligence that I think can be helpful to explain it is that I heard about a CEO in Australia. Let's call him JB. And JB had managed to double the headcount of a company that he worked with in a process of a year. So he doubled their headcount. It was a very big company to start with, and it was even bigger now. And their turnover was great. Everything was going really, really well. And my curiosity is really spiked now, and I wanted to know how this happened. So I interviewed him, and I also interviewed his board of directors. And when I interviewed the directors, every one of them said that JB was really annoying them. And I'm like, what do you mean? This man is doing incredible work here. You're flying. Why is that? He said, every CEO we've ever had have always wanted to talk about spreadsheets and we want to talk about numbers. JB doesn't. He just wants to talk about the people. I went, oh, really? He said, yeah, JB spends all of his day talking to the staff. Not even just his direct reports. He's out on the shop floor talking to his staff. He wants to know how they're feeling, what's happening with their families, what's happening with the competition, what's word on the street, what do you think about this product, what do you think of that product, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Do you still want to be here, or do you actually want to be promoted? Where are you going? They adore him. And that's emotional intelligence. And of course, what he's doing by demonstrating emotional intelligence in this way, he is actually collecting intelligence. Yes. He is collecting data to help him move the business forward. It's very clever.
That's fair. So that's high emotional intelligence, whereas the guy that goes over the spreadsheet locked in the office is not so high. We've got a couple of questions, comments here that throws out some, I suppose they could be neuroscience. I don't know. You can tell me. Andrew says, I am dyslexic. What is dyslexic?
Dyslexia is very interesting. A professor I know who is Japanese and lives in England. She is a professor and an expert in dyslexia. Her name is Taiko Waidel. And she has often been on television talking about dyslexia in Japan, in Japanese, and dyslexia in English. In actual fact, there is hardly any dyslexia in Japan because the way the alphabet is formed. But in England, we've got not a terribly opaque language, but it is quite difficult language to understand. So in England, it means that we are getting our letters mixed up a little bit. We're finding it a bit jumbled. So to read is difficult for us, or for some people with dyslexia. So there is something that's going on in the brain in that process that is not quite mainstream.
And it's particularly to do with letters, is it, and reading, as opposed to any wider issues?
Yeah, dyslexia tends to be in reading and writing.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, and of course, a lot of people now in education recognize it as being such, and therefore people who've got dyslexia are given extra time for exams and so on, so that they can think and concentrate and try to work out what this jumble is in front of them to make sense of it.
That's and Tracy talking about the politicians. She says they could be described as narcissists. I've heard this word a lot lately. What is a narcissist?
It's all about them, basically. Narcissistic behavior is all about them. So anything that goes on, they will turn it into their problem, or their talent, their something. It's all about them. So
And that is the way that the brain is wired, is it? That's the wiring of the brain. And can it be unwired?
It tends to be a personality trait, which it is developed. And if we have developed something, it means that it is soft wired. Hardwired is what we are born with, that it can't be changed. A hardwired is, for instance, when a bird builds a nest, they're hardwired to build the nest.
Right.
That's going to happen all the time. The soft wiring is all of these things that we learn, and then if it's soft wired, it can be changed.
Okay, now that is because we had that question about the criminal household and the infant, didn't we? So your hardwiring is like we are hardwired to walk and to talk, but your soft wiring is whether you think the whole world is about yourself or whether you have a more empathetic view to encompass that, and that can be changed.
Yes, habits are soft wired. So we can change habits. There are lots. So because we develop those habits in after birth. So anything like that we can change. We can change how we're motivated. We can change how we influence people. We can change how we solve problems. We can change how we're creative. We can change lots of things if it's soft wired.
Okay, so you can change a whole character of somebody.
Changing character. Well, if you think about that, you will have inherited certain traits from your parents through your DNA. So therefore, those things are with you. Whether those genes are turned on or turned off, it depends on many factors. And equally, we can step into the world of epigenetics again, where we can actually change the way our body and our brain is reading that DNA according to what we are doing and what's going on in our environment.
Okay, that's right. I think I've got that. Thank you so much for that. Now I've got a whole list of things that we're not going to have time to do, so we're going to have you back on. Whether you've got another book, I know, so we'll have you back on under the guise of that other book. But before we get to the end, I want you to explain to us the pleasure umbrella.
Okay, I'll tell you a little story that happened to me a very long time ago, and it will help you understand. I had a meeting in Fulham in London, and I parked my car one side of a park. And as I had high heels on, and it was autumn, the leaves were really, really slippery, and I was concentrating on the ground, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man who was sound asleep on a park bench. He had his hands under his arms like this, and he was covered in the morning dew, and he looked dirty, he was asleep, and he had 3 carrier bags under the bench, which were probably everything he owned. I kept walking. I got to the gate to where the office was, where my meeting was going to be. I had the meeting. I came back in the park, and now this time the man is on my right, and I kept walking. He was still asleep. And I got to the gate to where my car was parked, and I stopped. And I turned around. I went back past the man a third time, still asleep. I went back out to where the offices were, and I found a supermarket, and I bought a sandwich and an orange juice. I went back into the park, and I very quietly approached the sleeping man, and I put down the orange juice and sandwich. I backed off, and I walked away. Now, I didn't talk about it for a very long time, but that was an act of altruism. And I felt good for 3 days. Literally, I could do no wrong. My work was going through the roof. I was writing copy. I was lecturing. I was speaking from stage. I was working with my clients. I honestly, Humphrey, I could do no wrong for 3 days. Now,
Mhm.
after that, studying neuroscience, I realized that I stimulated several neurotransmitters in my brain through what I did. And one of them is nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide is a neurogas. It is it permeates blood vessels really, really, really fast. You will find nitric oxide is in heart medication. You can get nitric oxide through a food called with a chemical called arginine in it. So you can take it as a supplement. You can take it. You can stimulate it with food, with exercise, all of those things. But I stimulated it by being kind to someone. And the thing is with nitric oxide is it calms down cortisol, the stress hormone. And so if nitric oxide is up, cortisol is down, which allows serotonin, the happy chappy, dopamine, the motivator, and the reward seeking chemical, and all of those things to function better and to be stimulated at a better level. So nitric oxide is really quite an interesting chemical. Now, you cannot stimulate nitric oxide for 3 days in the system. It doesn't work that way. The neurotransmitters and the neurogases go up and down, up and down, up and down really, really fast. But the knock-on effect of me doing something for somebody else without expecting anything in return stayed with me for that length of time, and I became extremely efficient and effective. So the pleasure umbrella is actually putting the brain in a pleasurable state by being kind to others, and all of those things fall into place. That is the pleasure umbrella. It is not a sex toy.
So it's so just an act of kindness will, and I have so many questions coming from that, but let's leave it at that, because we have, so an act of kindness produces the pleasure umbrella. If you feel stressed or angry at all, be kind to someone, even if it's a stranger. And
it takes the focus off oneself.
Yes.
Because we're thinking of someone else, which is that moment of respite that we all need. So when if you are narcissistic, that won't happen. If you are stressed, you need to actually think of others. Now, that won't happen all of the time because you are having to focus on the perceived threat. That is what we're wired to do. We have to focus on the perceived threat. But if in a moment of realization that actually I'm not about to die or anything like that, the perceived threat is not that bad. It's bad enough, but it's not that bad. Then you can start thinking more broadly, open up your thinking of others, and then that will enable more creative thinking to solve the problem that you consider to be the perceived threat.
So don't feel threatened. I mean, the less we feel threatened, the more we can experience the pleasure umbrella.
Well, we can think of creative ways of getting out of the situation that we're in.
As opposed to that sort of, adrenaline fueled, shield yourself. Emma says, I've ordered your book on Amazon. Good, that's one sale we've made. Thank you, Emma. But I want to know if your book will help me train my brain to concentrate on one thing at a time. Mine tends to wander and touch on different things all at the same time. How do we do that?
Well, there is a myth that we multitask. We don't ever multitask. What we do is we switch rapidly between tasks. So therefore, there's a trade-off in switching. We will be wasting time or wasting efficiency. So I understand where you're coming from. I really do, because I'm like you. I'm a shiny new ball person. Oh, that's really interesting. And off I go on a tangent. The way that I manage to focus on one task at a time is to give myself a time limit. So for 30 minutes, I'm only going to do this. Or for 20 minutes, I'm only going to do this. Put an alarm on your phone if you want anything, but give yourself that window of time where you are being the most efficient you can be by honestly focusing on the one thing, and then go and make a cup of coffee or put your head in the fridge and see what there is to eat, or go for a walk around the block or something.
But Emma, 30 minutes, one thing only, and push everything out. Jennifer says, where did the time go? Fascinating. Thank you. Andrea D, very quickly, what is critical thinking?
Critical thinking is what it says on the tin, really. We are thinking critically, therefore we are dissecting whether something is going to work. We are analyzing more. when we are looking at something. We are not thinking creatively, we're thinking critically. So it's actually rather handy if you are coming up with to solve a problem. It's quite handy to think creatively and by putting the brain in alpha frequency. Alpha frequency is like the light meditative state. So it's a sort of state, you know, when you just wake up in the morning and you're not quite awake, you're not quite asleep, and you just stay there. Don't get up, because that is when the brain is really creative. And that's when you come up with answers, when you're in the shower, when you're going for a walk. So you can do that creative thinking, and then you can then switch that to your creative thinking, or critical thinking rather,
Right.
so that then you can analyze to see if it's going to work, and you can really make sure whether those crazy ideas that you had when you're in the shower can actually work.
Oh, great. So you're creative and you're critical. Thank you. I hope, Andrea, that answers the question for you. It certainly answered it for me. Stick with us, Lynda. Do not go anywhere. I have to tell our wonderful audience what is coming up on Tuesday, November the 8th. Lucinda is with Purpose, Passion and Grit. Carolyn Hornblower, she is a nurse for end-of-life care and the author of After a Life-Threatening Diagnosis, What Next? Lucinda back again November the 10th on Thursdays with Stephen Barker, author of The Flying Sikh, a story and a half, how Flying Officer Hardeep Singh Mallet fought through British bureaucracy and became a First World War pilot. And then on November 22nd, which is Remembrance Day, that's on the November the 11th, Lucinda is with Tessa Dunlop, the author of Elizabeth and Philip, a story of a young love, marriage and monarchy. But Tessa will also be talking about her war history books, The Sentry Girls, The Bletchley Girls, and The Army Girls. On Tuesday, November 15th, I am with Vaughan Smith in Purpose, Passion and Grit. He is the founder of the Frontline Club in London, which is a gathering place for war correspondents, politicians, movers and shakers. And he is currently, we were talking about Ukraine and what to do about it. He is leading hostile environment training to keep journalists, this is freelance journalists, as safe as can be in Ukraine. He also came to fame by giving sanctuary to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. That's Tuesday, November the 15th. I am then November the 17th with Tosca Lee, who will be in Nebraska on Inside Story. She's a beauty queen, a ballerina, a pianist, and an award-winning New York Times bestselling author, of which her latest is A Single Light, an adventure series in which an extinct disease has reemerged from the melting Alaskan permafrost to cause madness in its victims. That's something to get stressed about. And then on Friday, November the 18th, I'm with Maggie Piggott and her wonderful work. I have it here. How to Age Joyfully is a little bit about what we've been talking about. We have got a couple of minutes. Just give us a 2-second tip on how to age our brains joyfully. And I'm going to look through these comments that are coming in to wrap us up with.
Okay, I think the biggest tip I can give anybody is that my work is very serious, but I don't take myself seriously. And I think that is probably the best tip I can give everyone. Let's try to have some fun on a daily basis. Not going to happen all the time. Of course it's not. But if we, it's very underestimated fun and doing things for others through kindness and generosity. So I think if we can have some fun in our lives, we will be an awful lot healthier and happier.
Fun, the pleasure umbrella, and the kindness. That's what came out of that even more. Denise, what a fascinating topic. I definitely need to learn more about it. Please come back. Your brain is the boss. I'll put the link in again just before we finish. Yes, please come back. Such helpful ideas and advice. Pauline, I could listen to you all day. So interesting. Thank you. And Emma, this is Emma on her dancing mind. I hope you bring back Dr. Lynda Shaw for more discussion. Fascinating. I was in hospital for 2 months. Yes, we missed you, Emma. I missed all these chats. Good to be back. And it is so good to have you back too. And Geeta, got here late, but really enjoyed the session. Thanks so much, Humphrey and Lynda. Gillian, please, could you do a class on Goldster? Goldster runs these sort of session classes. That's it. You're in demand. Excellent. Thank you. That's it. Time's winged chariot is upon us, but I'm not going to let you go. Just give us another rounding thought on neuroscience, happiness, pleasure umbrellas.
Okay. All right. One other thing. If you're interested in neuroscience, you're interested in how the brain works, please do your research or go and learn from people who know what they're talking about, because there's an awful lot of nonsense out there and it's best not to listen to that. So, but brain is fascinating, and the more you learn and understand, the better off I think we'll all be.
And that's I'm just putting that up as a final thing. Your brain is boss. That's how to give yourself a pleasure umbrella. Surely. But that's it. We have to go. We only have an hour, but we could have done all day. We could have done a day's course on it. Time's winged chariot is upon us. Dr. Lynda, thank you so much for taking us on a guided tour of our brains. So much important to know what it's about. I'm going to make you our officially designated Goldster Neurostar. Is there such a thing as a Neurostar? You are one now. If that's neuro nonsense, let me know. Thank you, Goldster audience, for keeping us on our toes and asking all those questions. What a great show we've had. Until Tuesday, Purpose, Passion and Grit and Lucinda, stay curious, stay active, stay kind, we've learned today, stay safe, and of course, stay Goldster. Thanks, Dr. Lynda Shaw. Totally brilliant. Bye.
Bye-bye.